Hello, I'm Andrew Susskind, and I'm a psychotherapist and author based in West Los Angeles since 1992, specializing in trauma and addictions. Welcome to our podcast, which I call It's Not About the Sex, also the title of my recent book. Here we focus on all topics related to compulsive sexual behavior, often referred to as sex addiction. In particular, we explore ways to build long-term sustainable recovery while establishing more meaningful connection and greater intimacy. Our intention is to offer fresh viewpoints, brand new perspectives, and practical user-friendly tools toward living a more deeply connected life. Let's get started.
Hi Sue, how you doing?
Hey Andrew, I'm pretty good. How are you doing?
I'm okay. And today what I wanted to focus on is actually this moment in time, which is so unusual and so extraordinary, which is the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why I wanted to talk about it is everybody is talking about it in some shape or form. But I wanted us to really look at what it takes to build what I'm calling COVID stamina.
Mm.
Because here we are in the 6th month of the pandemic. Can you believe it?
Wow. No, I can. It still feels like it's only like April to me, you know?
I know,
Yeah.
I know. And yet, what I've been finding in myself and in my clients at times is that there's really a up and down kind of feeling. Sometimes feeling like, oh, I got this thing. I can ride these waves and,
Mm-hmm.
and do what I need to do. And then other times feeling depleted.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering just if I can get a sense of where you are with all this. How are you holding up?
Yeah, I definitely have those days where I just feel like, well, I imagine like someone who's stuck somewhere, like in prison or someplace where you're told you can't leave, and you just feel that anxiety, and I just want to bust out, just like, get me out of here, and it's just an inner struggle. And then what I end up doing is just kind of going for a walk and, go out and see nature and people and things like that. But yeah, every day is different, and most days are better than the bad days. Those experiences, I'm learning to deal with them in better ways. How about you?
Yeah. Um, Up and down, I would say for the most part, I'm coping all right. And at this moment, I just came back from a week away from my practice. I took a staycation, and here in Los Angeles, we have so many beautiful places to visit within really an hour or so from the city. And so I took day trips
Nice.
and I didn't stay anywhere. Like I didn't go to an Airbnb, I didn't go to a hotel. I'm really not quite there yet, but I just wanted to get out and breathe and
Mm-hmm.
have a chance away from the Zoom. I don't mind Zoom at this point. I'm actually very grateful for Zoom,
Mm-hmm.
but to be away from the computer for a week was really refreshing. So
Wow.
this moment in talking to you, I actually feel pretty refreshed for the most part.
Oh, that's nice. I think, yeah, if the listeners can take a time or a day to do that, I think it probably would be very beneficial in the whole
Yeah,
mental health scheme.
for sure. I mean, we'll talk more about that later, but it really does take some mindfulness to carve out some time for yourself
Mm-hmm.
because I believe that because COVID is kind of in the air, it's palpable, although it's invisible. It's kind of that weird mixture of like we know it's in everywhere, and at the same time, we also are not seeing it visibly,
Right.
and so there's this combination of so we know, most of us know that science has shown us that this is what's going on, and lots of people are sick, lots of people are dying, unfortunately. I mean, it's just horrific, the numbers that are growing.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, how do we live our lives with this pandemic of huge numbers of people dying? I mean, we're at 170,000 in the
Wow.
U.S. Is that right?
Yeah,
I think we're,
that's
yeah,
coming up on 200. Yeah, it's crazy numbers. And it is hard
Crazy,
because it's
yeah.
invisible, like you said, and we understand it's out there, but it's hard for, I think, a majority of people to be able to relate to something that they can't see. And if they don't know anyone personally that
Hmm.
has, passed on or has struggled with it, it seems like it's so far away from themselves,
Yeah,
and it's yeah, it's a difficult situation for our entire country to be in. Well, the entire world, I guess, but
for sure.
dealing with that
Yeah,
brings like a burden onto all of us.
right, right. And a call to action. I believe, and this is just maybe my idealistic view, is that I wish that each and every person worldwide, but certainly in America, could see this as an opportunity to be there for one another. That
Mm,
that are, for instance, and not to get too political because it's not really a political issue,
right,
but wearing masks is really to protect other people,
right.
right? And so it's actually an act of generosity. It's an act of compassion for others, and yet there's this bizarre controversy about whether or not it is something that we're all going to do, and we'll see how it plays out. But here at this moment in the summer of 2020, um, I think there's just so many different perspectives, and I'm just offering one perspective with you today,
Hmm.
which I hope can be helpful, meaningful, perspective building for those who are feeling alone in this, or feeling like that it's not being talked about in terms of stamina and perseverance and resiliency, which is really why we're doing this podcast today.
But hopefully soon we'll get some more answers, and that there's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
unknowns, and I do feel for like my neighbors who live alone, and
Mm-hmm.
um, they're feeling. I see them outside in their yards, pulling weeds or doing different things around their house just to get outside. But yeah, it's got to be really difficult. I'm thankful I have my dog.
I'm telling you, there's something about walking the dog that is it's such a gift. Today, we may have taken it for granted in the past that, oh, I've got to walk the dog a few times a day, but now it's like a pleasure to get outside into the
Mm-hmm.
neighborhood, even if I'm wearing my mask, which I do each and every time.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea of circulating and not feeling so confined, and I think you
Mm.
said something a moment ago that I was going to touch upon, which is I think there is a big difference between those who live alone and those who live with others.
Mm-hmm.
And I have found with many of my clients who live alone that there's an added layer of profound loneliness and profound challenge around what does it take to create connection with others? What does it take to, find kind of a peaceful place within oneself? Because there's something that's really difficult when we're told we have to stay at home, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't have stay.
Exactly. Yep.
It's different than when we choose to stay at home.
Right. Yep.
I'm, and yet I think that there's this moment where there's this creation of, so what does aloneness mean to me? What does solitude mean to me? What does it mean to be good company for myself? Many years ago, when I not that many years ago, but many years ago when I turned 40, I actually went on a big trip to Europe, and I actually went on my own. I was supposed to go with someone, and it didn't work out, and I was alone on that trip. And what I learned is that I was pretty good company for myself. I actually didn't know that. I mean, I was
Mm.
anxious at first. I had never traveled in that far away from home by myself.
Mm-hmm.
But over time, I realized, I can wake up when I want to wake up. I can read a book when I want to read a book. I can get a gelato when I want to get a gelato.
Yeah.
And
Your own rules. Yep.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And kind of following that rhythm is something that we don't often get to do.
Mm-hmm.
or at least mindfully do in our usual routines. And I think there's something that I've been talking about with my clients in terms of, how do you embrace the idea of being alone? And if you're feeling lonely, how do you work with the loneliness? How do you find connection? How do you meditate about it? How do you let the waves of loneliness kind of ride on through? So there really is a distinction, and I don't know if you've seen this as well, but between those who live alone and those who live with others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, well, I just want to go back a little bit. So, are your clients able to? I kind of look at it as making a switch in your thinking. Are they finding it easy to be alone with themselves, or are they running into issues?
Well, they're certainly running into issues,
Mm-hmm.
and running into some speed bumps around how do they find ways of feeling more at peace with themselves at home. But I think what's important, especially since I have the opportunity of processing these feelings with them, is helping them look at specific ways to feel more connected.
Mm-hmm.
So, and by the way, before I forget, there's a big difference between those who are able-bodied and
Oh,
are
sure.
more mobile,
Mm-hmm.
and those who are not as healthy and are actually need to be at home. And so
Mm.
what I have found is actually that sometimes the able-bodied folks who are staying at home, quarantining, are more anxious
Sure.
because they're not used to it,
Right.
right? So it's kind of like the person who circulates more. We might say they're more the extroverted type, right?
Right.
And they're the ones that are generally out and about and scheduling themselves and maybe working really hard and all those kinds of things. And that's one rhythm, right? And it's not easy to shift gears and be at home if you're used to that kind of out and about style.
Mm-hmm.
But people who are more introverted or more shy or more stay at home by nature, actually their lifestyle doesn't change a whole lot. So it's
Right.
actually easier in a
Right.
lot of ways for them. That's what I have found.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we spoke earlier about the choice, like it's not my choice to stay home, um, and almost feeling like it's a bully to you, but standing up to it and understanding that it is your choice to stay home because what you're doing is important. So I think that mind shift is so important for those people who were more active, and now there are ways to be active. You just got to allow it, the different ways that technology is allowing us to be more active and find solutions. And that's what it's all about, being resourceful, I guess, and turning that resourceful part of your brain on so that you can still continue to do the things that you enjoy doing. But it's just sometimes there's a block there, I would assume, for some people that don't want to try new things. But I think being human, we've lived through a lot, and we need to allow ourselves to be flexible. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's a big part of it.
Well, I love the word mind shift because if we are used to doing things a certain way, right? That's where the neural pathways, the grooves in our
Mm,
brain are used to the well-worn path, right?
right. Yep.
The mind shift is saying, oh, okay, so if I'm doing this for the greater good, is that enough reason for me to shift my mind and to consider this new way of being? Now, in 12-step terms, it really is a surrender.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a third step. It's
Yep.
like saying, how do I turn my life and my will over the care of God or whatever you believe in? Um, to know that somehow that's the faith that this requires. And
Mm.
not everybody has that background, but for those who are either in 12 step or have different spiritual beliefs, I think there is something about relying on something larger than ourselves, whatever you call that, God, higher power, universal power, etc. And and it's tough because a lot of people are angry with God right now.
Mm-hmm.
right? A
Yeah.
lot of people are saying, what is this about? Why are we in this situation? And like you said before, as much as we know, we don't know about the pandemic. And I think on a spiritual, existential level, we may never know, but all we know is that we are being faced with one of the greatest challenges of our lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
And can we build the capacity to cope with COVID as long as it's here, which is what I call the long haul. We don't know what the long haul is at
Mm-hmm.
this point. Hopefully, next year we'll have way more answers than we have now, but it's going to be gradual. And you and I were talking about this before, Sue, this idea that I think we had false expectations.
Mm-hmm.
Many of us thought that we would see this flattening out of the curve by the end of June, here in California, here in the States. But the opposite happened. There was a spike. The numbers have been going up. It's really been not only disheartening, but disillusioning for so many of us. So in a way, it was like this bait and switch because we weren't prepared. We really weren't prepared for this to be going on for so long. And again, without going into the politics of it,
Mm-hmm.
um, I think there was a messaging from a lot of folks, not just from the White House, um, about the flattening of the curve
Right.
that just was the hope and might have been different. I mean, in retrospect, there's all kinds of things that might have been different, but we're left with this personal responsibility of, how do we build capacity to cope with COVID? In other words, how do we build stamina?
Yeah. It's not easy for sure. And when you talk about the third step, I think what I hear a lot in that is about giving up control,
Yes.
and it in having trust, and that's a big part of who we are as people and as citizens of the U.S. And trust and control when that seems to be, going by the wayside. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
it does feel like a bait and switch, and more than just flattening the curve, but also in everything else we've been told to do and trying to do. I mean, a lot of us are trying to do what we think is the best thing to do, but there's a lot of
Hmm.
hurdles to overcome. But let's move on. Like, what do you think is emotional nourishment?
I borrowed this term from a colleague of mine because I consult with a colleague on my groups, and I love group
Hmm.
work. I love what group therapy does in terms of healing. And one thing she told me is each and every group, as a group leader, we're looking for the emotional nourishment that a group member can receive in that particular 90-minute group, because all of my groups are weekly 90-minute groups.
Okay.
And I love that idea because, in other words, how do I provide emotional nourishment and how do the group members provide emotional nourishment for one another?
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that, just to break it down, is really anything that helps us feel more full, more fortified, more hopeful, rather than more depleted or more hopeless,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And so, in the context of our conversation today, emotional nourishment really has to do with anything that helps us feel more buoyant, anything that helps us feel, like you said before, more resourceful, more regulated, more resilient. And so, for instance, going on my staycation last week,
Mm-hmm.
um, I did 5 days of day trips actually. And the emotional nourishment that I received from each and every one of those um, excursions
Mm-hmm.
were really about the simple gifts. So
Nice.
I would bring a picnic with me because I haven't been actually to too many restaurants. I've been doing a little takeout here or there,
Mm-hmm.
but I've been making my lunch, literally packing it up, and rolling out the blanket with the dog and having my picnic lunch. And sometimes that's at the beach. Sometimes that's been with a friend or somebody who I was meeting, with social distancing, of course, and masks and all that. But the idea really is, how do I feel like I'm feeding myself rather than feeling deprived? Because a lot of my clients talk about deprivation,
Mm-hmm.
or feeling like things are being taken away.
Right.
Because I think that's really the kind of the litmus test.
Mm-hmm.
Can I feed myself and nourish myself in whatever way possible,
Nice.
or do I just let myself get depleted and just don't have any energy left?
Yeah, and I love that emotional nourishment. Just what it conjures up in my mind is exactly what you spoke about. But having group connectivity, even though it's through Zoom, um, it's still important to have those connections. And no matter how you can get to it, it's just it fills you up from inside. Seeing someone's smiling face or simple pleasures like that. And it's hard wearing masks because you can't see people's smiling faces.
Mm-hmm.
So on
Mm-hmm.
Zoom, it just brightens you up and it does warm you up from inside. And I always feel like nourishment is that warmth that you feel from within. And that can be from yourself or from other people. So I think that's so important. And it's great that you were able to find that in just the simple pleasures. I mean, it's just, we did the same thing. We traveled up to the coast. We hadn't been to the beach in, I think, a year. And
Mm.
just sitting there on our blanket with our cooler,
Mm-hmm.
breathing in the cool air from the ocean was just, oh my gosh. And we were only there for about a half hour, but it was just fantastic. Just felt like I was being replenished.
Mm-hmm.
But I try to do that every day in my mind. I just try to close my eyes and put myself, in that people say, picture yourself in a happy place. It does work as well. I mean, you can find many ways to nourish that.
Right. Right.
So,
It doesn't have to be driving to a beautiful spot.
right.
I think meditation and guided imagery and
Mm,
mindful self-compassion are all ways of bringing that inner peace, or at least that attempt to touch into that place within you that does feel resilient.
mm-hmm.
But you're right, it's not just about taking a staycation. It's how do we do this on a daily and weekly basis when we're in our routines.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that it really takes a lot of creative connection nowadays, like
Mm-hmm.
in a way that we've never had to do before. I don't know about you, Sue, but like just going for a walk with a friend with our masks on, of course, um, for me is very enriching. Very, it's just like it makes a huge difference. And going for a walk with a friend in the past would have been, a pleasant thing to do. I always like going for a walk with a friend,
Right.
but nowadays it's taken on a whole new kind of experience.
Right. It's like going to Disney World. It's like this
It
is
is.
this is our new Fantasyland. Like it was thrilling just to be with somebody somewhere else. So um,
Right.
I definitely have switched my thinking around the simple pleasures and spending time with someone. My neighbor and I walked down to the end of the street. She just happened to be out walking, and I was walking the dog, and I walked with somebody else, just like you're saying, and I was like, "Wow, that was
Yeah.
amazing!" A simple little
Yeah.
thing, and it was amazing.
Yes.
So yeah, I encourage people to try to make those connections if they can, as
Oh, for sure.
it just
And
fills
and
you.
I think it's a matter of holding the intention, like really saying, how can I feel more connected to myself and to others,
Hmm.
and possibly to a higher power, each and every day. And recently, I'm not real. That's funny that we're talking on a podcast, but I don't listen to that many podcasts. That's my confession of the day. Although when I was going various places last week, and I was in the car for a few hours, I was listening to some podcasts, and I have to tell you, I felt really connected to those podcasts. I don't know if you're familiar with Dax Shepard and the Armchair
Oh, yes,
Expert.
yes, yes, yes.
Really cool. I was listening to him interview Bill Gates, and it was a great interview. And then I was listening to Brene Brown, and she has a new podcast that came out a few months ago, and just was so connecting for me. I've always felt connected to Brene Brown, but this is the kind of creative connection that I'm going to do rather than listening to the music I enjoy, which is a different kind of connection. When I'm in the car, I'm going to pop on that podcast and really connect to the conversations that are available, which I hope our listeners will do to my podcast and in general. But yeah, it's like, what helps us feel less alone? You know, what helps us feel like there's a sense of, oh, okay, I'm part of something bigger than myself, and I don't have to feel like I'm in my cocoon.
Right. And I do love that podcast do that. You know, when you listen to them, you feel like they're in the car with you, or because we're speaking to your audience right now, and you know, we are talking to each other, but I'm talking and you're speaking as if there are other people listening, and that's what
Right.
that's what the connectivity is, and it is a creative connection, and I love that you call that, and it is all about. I mean, I think our whole lives are about making connections, and that's I mean, I would always say my purpose in life was to meet everybody on the planet, and that's why I went to India, because I figured I'd start there.
Wow, you went a long
I
way.
went, yeah. It's like, let me just go where the most people are. but
Right.
but it is. I love hearing the stories, and everyone has a story, and it it humbles you, you know, and it makes you feel nourished in connecting with people.
Right. Right. And you know, like you, I also believe that I was brought onto this planet for relationships. I'm not sure why, but from the time I was really, really little, I was like a heat-seeking missile, always trying to find the folks in my neighborhood or the people in my life who were really going to be there for me, who I really could count on, and who had my back, and vice versa. I enjoy the back and forth as we get to do, you and I, Sue, in our relationship. But you know, I call these people my emotionally reliable posse, and I don't go for numbers anymore. I'm not a believer in huge numbers of people in my life, but I really try and focus on those who are there in a mutually reliable way. You know, whether it be a therapist, whether it be a sponsor, whether it be close friends, whether it be a family member, if you're lucky enough to have that, like I am, and to cultivate those relationships, and to know that that kind of connection sustains me. I mean, this is a moment with the pandemic where it takes sustainability, right? It takes stamina. It takes a resiliency that we haven't seen before, right? So again, that idea of creative connection. I'll give you another example. You know, I'm really close with my aunt, as you know, and my aunt is in her late 80s at this point, and she's living with my cousin, and they have a great big porch. They have a porch on the front, and they have a big deck on the back, and so to have a meal there, which I've been doing weekly, is another way of just hanging out. Unfortunately, we don't get to hug, we don't get to touch, but we get to share the space and the time and have that experience together. So creatively, how do we connect? How do we find that part of us that can say, I can't do this, but I can do that? And how do I lean into that and not get too caught, hopefully, in that feeling of deprivation.
It's a wonderful challenge.
Ah,
I take
yeah,
it. Yeah. No, it's a good challenge because it only has good results, right? So you just got to
for sure.
push
For
yourself.
sure.
Yeah. I love that. I love that
Yeah.
image too of the porch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's very touching when I think about it. It's really a gift, to be able to spend time together. It's
Hmm.
not the kind of time we're used to, and it wouldn't necessarily be the time we choose, but it's the time and the space and the spirit of shared time and connection. You know, I always come back to this same quote. It's actually in the front of my book, but the quote goes like this: "The opposite of addiction isn't sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection."
It's so important. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
I
love
mean,
that
this
quote.
comes from Johann Hari. Um, Came up with that quote, and he did a really good TED talk around it, and it touched me so deeply because really, when we're talking about recovery from any addictive compulsive behaviors, it's so much about the connection that is the healer, right? The connection to self, the connection to others, the connection to a power greater than oneself. And right now, unfortunately, there is more loneliness than usual
Right.
around us, and there's more challenges to stay connected. But I just urge those who are listening to, keep hanging in there, and to try and make those connections that may seem simple in some ways, but can really be nourishing and really be meaningful to build the stamina to help us through this extraordinary moment in time.
That's wonderful. It's so great to share this with you. And I feel like our connection like continues on in so many different ways. But through this podcast, it reaches so many people and hopefully it brings that connection to them as well.
Absolutely. And thank you for mentioning that, Sue, because as I've mentioned a few times in our past conversations, you and I have known each other now 35 years, more or less.
Yep.
Crazy. And our connection is such a touchstone for me. And
Hmm.
of course, I absolutely include you in my inner circle, my posse of emotionally reliable people. And so, it's a reminder. Sometimes we don't say this out loud, but it's the gratitude that goes along with those who really are there, and that are just there through thick and thin.
Hmm.
And you're certainly one of those people, for sure.
Well, the feeling's mutual, and I appreciate that I have you in my life. So thank you.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, my pleasure. So we'll end with that, and we'll continue this conversation over time as needed. But I do hope that just this little conversation that we offer today can remind each of you that the stamina that is required for something like this is a tall order, but it's not insurmountable. So, take really good care of yourselves, be well, stay safe, and we will talk with you soon. Thank you for listening today. It's always terrific sharing the time with my very talented colleague and friend, Sue Merlino. And today we discuss this super significant, timely topic about the pandemic and specifically what I call COVID stamina. Be sure to give us a 5-star rating on iTunes, or please share our podcast on Spotify. And if there are any topics you would like us to discuss in the future, please let us know. I look forward to you joining us on future podcasts, and thanks again for being with us today.